Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Much news this week. In particular, we're going to dedicate our second hour, and if possible more, to the European elections on the the 22nd, 25th of May, and in that time period for the different countries, it's not all on, excuse me, one day, there's going to be the European Parliament elections. And normally this is not of great interest, but this time it is the focus of world attention, and it is one of the greatest sources of hope that we can find anywhere on the current world scene. And this is the list led by Alexis Tsipras, Tsipras. Look him up. Find out more about him. This is the man. This is the right man in the right place at the right time with the right program, strategy, organization, and general approach. Tsipras has called for the creation of lists, that is to say, slates, tickets, in every European country, and this is not just the Eurozone, this is everybody in Europe. It's 27 countries, and the idea is that Tsipras is now a candidate to be the chairman of the European Commission, that is to say, to become the head, the Secretary General of the European bureaucracy, taking the place of the Portuguese fascist Barroso, the neoliberal tool of the IMF and so forth. Now, I've just been listening to the speech, and it's a masterful speech by Tsipras in Rome, where he arrived at the Teatro del Valle, the theater there in the middle of Rome, occupied theater. He's gotten there at about 11:30 or 11:45 a.m. on this Friday, the 7th of February 2014. This is when we're recording here in the afternoon, and we're going to go through the general profile of Tsipras. And remember, he is now on track to become the next prime minister of Greece and to go into those meetings of the European Union and fight killer austerity, fight genocidal austerity, and fight those noxious doctrines called neoliberalism. And of course, neoliberalism is practically the same thing as the libertarian Austrian school. They're indistinguishable in practice, right? Whatever the various theoretical complications are. So the death knell of libertarianism, I hope, is going to be one of the key elements coming out of this European election. So we're going to get into that coming right up in the second hour. We've also got Victoria's Secret. We have the unfortunate, the wretched, the pitiful Victoria Nuland of the State Department, caught in her intemperate rhetoric when she says obscenity, the European Union. Well, what it shows is what we've always sustained. Victoria Nuland is obscene. The Kerry Rice foreign policy is an obscenity, and now it has been summed up appropriately by Madame Nuland, this repulsive figure on the world stage. But let's look first of all about the immediate austerity fronts here in the United States. Right? What's the story with austerity? Well, the Farm Bill has passed the Senate. It came out of the House, and it has now passed the Senate, meaning that Harry Reid let it go through, and the Democrats could have killed it, filibustered it, whatever you want. And now it looks like Obama is going to sign this. What a wretched day. What a wretched, miserable spectacle. The food stamp program, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is going to be gouged to the tune of $8.5 billion over 10 years. So it's almost $1 billion a year of food stamp cuts. Now, this is, of course, the impulse comes from the fascist and reactionary Republicans, right, who are demanding with this genocide against the American people. How many Americans will die? A finite but considerable number are likely to die as a result of this measure, and they're the poorest, right? They're the people, and it's noticeable, in the northern states where the LIHEAP program, the winter the fuel assistance of the federal government, if you can get on the LIHEAP program, low-income heating assistance program, then in a number of states it became automatic that you could get on the food stamp program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, right? And these are people who are struggling for their very lives and for their dignity. But of course, the fascism, in other words, the modern Republican Party, and its libertarian auxiliaries, that doesn't mean anything. That's big government. That's hurting the deficit and the debt and all the rest of this. So I guess that's a given in our world, but Obama is going to sign it. Obama is going to sign a farm bill that cuts the food stamp program by $8.5 billion. Could there be any clearer testimony to the degradation of this regime? Again, Obama's bad. He's willing to cut it. The Democrats have accepted it. The Republicans originally wanted $40 billion of cuts in this. And the other big irony, of course, is that any number of agricultural subsidies are maintained. There are some House Republicans who are personally the beneficiary of those subsidies. But again, I think some of that that's a mixed bag, right? Some of that stuff can be justified, other parts not. Right? You got to remember, food security is absolutely critical. You got to be willing to pay something to get that done. But then, what is absolutely indefensible, right? What is clearly a sign of moral depravity, political bankruptcy, and indeed, it's a Nuremberg invitation comes out of this. You cut the food stamp program by $8.5 billion. So how is Obama now going to argue that he's for the middle class when he lets that go through? And, of course, he's going to say he's delighted by so much bipartisanship. This is exactly the bipartisanship we don't want, the bipartisanship of genocide, of killer cuts. That's the only kind of genocide you can get with the modern Republicans. And, of course, the Wall Street Democrats are eager to fall in line for that. So we have got to say no to bipartisan genocidal cuts in the food stamp budget. And any Democrat who voted for that, well, it's been nice knowing you. Now, the other side of this particular coin is the extended unemployment benefit. And this has gotten essentially bogged down and strangled in the House of Representatives. It was yesterday that the extended unemployment, of course, this is a wretched sop. This is a shuck, as we used to say. The extended unemployment benefit for 3 months, 90 days, at the cost of $6.4 billion. That's a couple of days of the Afghan war. Well, that was voted down. The Republicans voted against it, of course, with the exception of Ayotte of New Hampshire, Collins of Maine, Heller of Nevada, Murkowski of Alaska. That got them up to 58 to 40, but that was not enough because of the permanent filibuster by Mitch McConnell, who he's a reactionary with a fascist breathing down his neck, and then, of course, the Republican Party in general. Now, notice that Obama didn't fight. Obama, gave a couple of speeches on that and then dropped it. We'll get back to this in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Follow all of this at Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. Some new material there this week, including my call for Ban Ki-moon of the United Nations to be impeached because of his hooligan conduct in connection with the Geneva-Montreux Conference on Syria. So all of that at Tarpley.net. It also allows you to order the various books that I've been publishing lately, and that includes the study of the First World War, La France Conquise. Get it, puzzle it out. I mean, a lot of people can read French, but there are also articles in there in English, one distinguished one, I would say, by me. So that's at Tarpley.net. So Obama seems to be doing everything possible to destroy the Democratic position in the Congress, right? First, Obama did not fight the Farm Bill. You could see that a mile away. He did not fight to stop the cuts in food stamps. And remember, these cuts in food stamps are now the second round of cuts, because we already had cuts in November when the food stamp provisions of the old stimulus from 2009 expired after the 4 years, I guess, that they were in effect, or whatever it was. They ended during the month of November, so we've now had Thanksgiving and Christmas and Martin Luther King Day, and pretty soon it'll be Valentine's Day, all of them under the rule of reduced food stamp payments, right? Brutal cuts in the SNAP program. So Obama is now allowing a second round of killer cuts, okay? This has genocidal implications, right? This is going to kill people in the United States. Now, the second question is then the extended unemployment benefits. And as I said, the Republicans, in this case, were demanding that it be paid for. And what they mean by paid for is they want killer cuts in other programs. They're intent on doing the maximum political damage. And that's actually what Harry Reid says. Harry Reid, in a moment of candor, said, "We've given the Republicans everything they wanted." Yeah, that's your problem. You give them everything they wanted, says Harry Reid. They can't take yes for an answer. Well, obviously, because they want to undercut the only argument that Obama seems to be able to develop, which is that he's for the middle class. Well, unfortunately, if you're for the middle class, you got to do something about it, right? It's not salvation by faith alone. You got to have some good works in there. So this was what was defeated last night was a proposal by Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, 3 months of extended unemployment, $6.4 billion, and it was going to come out of certain pension contributions made by companies, and the idea was that some of that money would go into the Treasury through a rather complex calculation. Republicans, of course, against it. Now, if you want to know how to pay for it, you want to know how to pay for fully funding the food stamp program, take it at least back to pre-November levels, right? Restore that stimulus element, because as we see from the anemic job creation, right, 115,000 jobs created. That's just pathetic, right? You better start learning Chinese at that rate. We can see that the recession is still here. The depression is still here. We're still in the Great Depression that started in 2008. The world derivatives panic followed by the world derivatives depression. You want to pay for it? It's the Wall Street sales tax, the 1% tax on Wall Street turnover applied to the food stamp budget, fully fund that, and make unemployment benefits essentially open-ended for the 99ers, for the 199ers, right? People who don't have a job in this economy, who have worked, who have paid in, they acquire insurance. That insurance has got to be open-ended. It's got to be there, because what is the purpose? The purpose is to maintain a workforce, a labor force, so that that can be mobilized for purposes of national economic development. So it's a national imperative. The strategic interest of the United States dictates, requires that the labor force be maintained intact, that they not be destroyed by poverty, disease, despair, alcoholism, drug addiction, and all the rest of it that comes with extreme poverty, that they not lose all their skills, that they be able to take retraining courses and so forth. Now, the tragedy, of course, is now we put these together, We needed the Wall Street sales tax. The Democratic Party as a whole is incapable of pulling itself together, right? Here and there, we see little initiatives, right? Congressman Conyers is one of the more serious ones, right? He wants to have a modest turnover tax in order to pay for a job creation program in the Treasury budget. That's fine for people who are very difficult to employ, right? Who would have a hard time starting off in the private sector. Let them go through this program and then move on to other things. That's perfectly good. That's absolutely essential. Then you've had these other people, Bernie Sanders said it once or twice, Keith Ellison said it once or twice, the Progressive Caucus said it once or twice. But most of those people, when they get on television, they don't talk about the Wall Street sales tax or whatever they call it, like the Robin Hood tax. A terrible, terrible name. But even Robin Hood tax would be better than nothing. Most of them get on there and talk about whatever it's going to be. So you put these two things together, the Democrats are headed towards big losses in Congress. And it's not Obamacare, it's this stuff. Obamacare cuts both ways, right? Because there are a lot of people who are getting medical coverage now for the first time, right? There are people in the petty bourgeoisie who have their axes to grind and they have complaints and they're disgruntled and all that. But really, what's going to destroy the Democratic congressional campaign in November is this stuff. Food stamp cuts, no extended jobless benefits. How can you say you're for the middle class? You didn't fight. You didn't pull out all the stops. Obama did not, nor did the people, right? You could have had, how about a Democratic filibuster? Our wonderful, wonderful populists. Where was Elizabeth Warren? Where was Sherrod Brown? Where were all the great populists of the Senate? If the scoundrel Rand Paul, or on another occasion, the scoundrel Cruz and his friend, the scoundrel Lee, if they can mount some kind of a filibuster, right, a Potemkin filibuster, what's with these populist left liberals? Where are they? Are they alive? Do they exist? Are they in the Bahamas? I don't know, but nothing visible. So with the food stamp betrayal and the extended unemployment betrayal, Democratic Party looking bad. Now let's add in the other thing, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, free trade, the giant sucking sound, the sellout of jobs, the impoverishment, right? Sweatshop competition, the runaway shop. We'll look at that in a minute. That's the third strike in this context. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Here is Webster Tarpley on this February 7th. We'll get to Victoria's Secret in a little while. But Obama really courting a tremendous defeat. And these Democratic congressional leaders, what are they thinking? Food stamps cut by $8.5 billion over 10 years on top of the previous cuts, and the extended unemployment bogged down in the Senate, to say nothing of the House. The only way to break through that would be a serious, sustained campaign by Obama, right? Essentially pointing out not just that they won war with Syria, right? That's fine. That's an important point. You should make that point. But that they're proposing genocide against the American people. That's the bottom line. And you want to make deals with genocidalists, you don't do that. You try to destroy them, and then you make a deal, right? And it's called a capitulation by them. And the answer is the 1% Wall Street sales tax. Read all about it in various articles at tarpley.net. Every time the Republicans say extended jobless benefits have got to be paid for, you say, let's have Wall Street pay. They created the Depression, their derivatives, their criminal activity. Criminal activity, by the way, worse than LIBOR. We've now got New York State banking regulators who are looking at various banks, Deutsche Bank, Barclays Bank, Standard and Chartered, and a few others for fakery in foreign exchange, right? So you'll have a new criminal conspiracy to motivate why there has to be a 1% Wall Street sales tax, to suppress speculation, to retilt the playing field in favor of productive investment in tangible physical commodity production, and then at the same time get money for the Treasury so you can pay for these programs. Now, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, an abomination, right? Execrable. And simply, with NAFTA, I suppose you could argue for some people ignorance, but now there is no more plea of ignorance because we've seen what happens with the giant sucking sound. And the Obama White House is absolutely committed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, right? Those three things, food stamp cuts, no jobless benefits, Trans-Pacific Partnership, that adds up to a bloodbath for congressional Democrats. The congressional Democrats have got to rebel. I would also add, Obama, look, their handwriting is on the wall. The Republicans haven't impeached you, which they could easily do, because it would go nowhere in the Senate. If the Republicans take the Senate, then impeachment becomes a perfectly feasible operation for these reactionaries and fascists on the Republican side. So Obama really looks like he's doing his best to lose the November election. Harry Reid at least had the sense to try to separate himself from it, right? As people know, he said last week, Thursday or Friday, I'm against fast track. He doesn't say that he's against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would be better. But at least he says he's against fast track, right? Which is a way to railroad this through the Congress. So against fast track, and he says, I think it would be in everybody's interest not to push this. Well, certainly his interest, right? If he wants to stay as the majority leader, he better not let fast track go through. He better not let the Trans-Pacific Partnership go through on a fast track. But again, add those up, right? That's your austerity front. Now, there's also a possible fourth front, which is the debt ceiling, right? As of today, according to some calculations, the 7th of February, the Treasury has ended its borrowing authority, according to the unconstitutional, illegal debt limit statute, right, based on the Liberty Loan of 1917, a real founding document of the up there we got the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, we got the Bill of Rights, and we've got the Liberty Loan of 1917, which is the great straitjacket. The Treasury, according to that piece of nonsense, has officially run out of, not of money, but of borrowing authority as of today. And being unable to borrow, they then are reduced to various accounting tricks, which are thought to be enough to get to the end of the month, or maybe a little bit beyond. Now, Boehner, I think he's trying to gauge how weak Obama and the Democrats actually are. This was after the retreat of the Republican hordes there to Cambridge, Maryland, at the end of last week. They were talking about what they could get for raising the debt ceiling, and Boehner says, we're still looking for the pieces to this puzzle. We do not want to default on our We will not default on our debt. We're in discussions with members on how to move ahead. We've got time to do this. No decisions have been made. This could be any number of things of extortion, right? One of their things is a killer amendment that would, repeal Obamacare, whatever it is, something that Obama couldn't accept, and that we don't want either, right? Because you don't go backwards from this point. You want to go forwards. So that's national bankruptcy, right? And that's, of course, a world crisis. In this case, what do we need? Here's where we need an executive order. I find people dysphoria. Oh, executive orders. Oh, I'm uncomfortable. They're unconstitutional. No, they're not. Some of the greatest things in American history were executive orders, i.e., the Emancipation Proclamation. And the term executive order seems to come from Lincoln, executive order to create some courts in Louisiana. So it seems to be an invention of Abraham Lincoln to call it executive order. But the things themselves go back to Washington. It is an open and shut case. They are completely constitutional. This is how the president acts as the chief executive of the United States. Executive means you do things, in case that has been lost on the modern libertarian mind, if we can call it that. So that is now the need is an executive order which says Dear Treasury Secretary Lew, you will disregard any statements or any statutes that have to do with debt ceilings because they are prima facie unconstitutional. We have the 14th Amendment, Section 4. The public debt of the United States contracted by law, incurred by law, shall not be questioned. Means you got to pay it. So in order to pay it, you're going to have to hold Treasury auctions and come up with the money that way. National bankruptcy is illegal. The debt ceiling is unconstitutional. And remember that exercise, right? If you reach the point of no money, you're going to violate some kind of law. Either you're not going to carry out budget expenditures that are mandated by law, or you're going to have to raise taxes or some form of income by executive action, or you're going to have to do what I just said. You're going to have to ignore the debt ceiling and continue to borrow money. And out of all of those, the least damaging and the least, what can we say, formally speaking, the one that violates the fewest provisions is to go ahead and continue with the Treasury auctions. Now, the entire world financial situation has gotten somewhat stormy, right? We've had the emerging markets, right? Of course, it emerges in retrospect that the emerging markets were nothing but hot money coming from the Fed, at least primarily. Hot money from the Fed in Turkey, hot money from the Fed in South Africa, hot money from the Fed in Argentina. Now, Argentina is a country with a certain consistency as anti-imperialist, and they're undoubtedly targeted. I would also say Turkey also has positive things. The idea of building a second Bosporus to Dardanelles passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, that is a great idea. Erdogan, why didn't you stick to that instead of your crazy Syrian adventure, right? Why didn't you stick to no problems, no conflict, no interference, and build the second canal out of the Black Sea? But now all of those countries are getting in a rocky zone because the hot money is fleeing back to Wall Street, as we reviewed last week. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So Obama, you better, Obama, Harry Reid, and Pelosi, you better start fighting on the populist economic issues, because otherwise your entire rhetorical posture is completely untenable. It's exposed as a lot of hot air. Food stamp, fully fund food stamps, unlimited extended jobless for people who have worked and paid into the system. Stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership and obey the 14th Amendment. Tell Lou right now we're not going to default, and the Republicans, sorry, that's not going to be possible. We've now entered the Yellen era as of a week ago. We've had 1 week of the Yellen era, and you look at the stock market in the past week and so forth, it's been rather turbulent. And, of course, this is because of the failed policies. Yellen will continue what Helicopter Ben began, and she's going to do this under the influence of her husband and under the influence of this guy Stanley Fischer. And our answer to that is stop Fischer, stop brain dead, Tarpley for Fed head. And the answer simply is seize control of at least part of the Federal Reserve, open up a credit facility, have $4 or $5 trillion available for infrastructure, buy the bonds from the states, 0% 100-year bonds, and have at least $1 trillion in there somewhere, maybe a special window, to refinance the entire outstanding student loan burden down to 0%, so that we at least neutralize it and people can take their own sweet time paying it back, because that's what we want. So we've had these days with the stock market down more than 300 points. We have reached that point of breakdown, right? And it's ironic, again, as we said before, the Hermann Miller social democratic government in Weimar Germany reached the point of decrees, breakdown of the normal political process in March of 1930 over the question of unemployment benefits and how they could be financed. And the reactionaries wanted to increase the tax on all workers to pay for the unemployment benefits of some, and the Social Democrats said no to that. That Herman Miller government fell, and from March of 1930 to January of 1933, and even beyond, there were no majorities, and there were no measures that went through the Reichstag, the parliament. So it was all ruled by decree. In general, the emergency decrees of Brüning that were approved by the President von Hindenburg. So that's the point we've now reached. Italy, as I pointed out last week, has reached the same point. The so-called IMU, Bank of Italy decree law, which occasioned a riot in the Italian Chamber of Deputies, and I'm sure similar things are going on in other countries. We've gone through a kind of a phase change, and we'll get back to that in the second part. Let's look for a minute at Syria. We are clearly in the presence of a new war mobilization concerning Syria. One of the forms this takes, here we have the Washington Post editorial of yesterday, Thursday, February 6th. Here we're told that the British and other allies in the United Nations Security Council are bringing back a resolution that would call for allowing humanitarian aid deliveries to areas now cut off because of military sieges and authorize UN agencies to work in areas not under government control and force Russia to come out against it, they say. Well, let's also remember, in most of these siege situations, it is the death squads, it is the terrorist rebels paid by Saudi Arabia and run by the CIA. They're the ones who are imposing the siege. It's not primarily the Assad government that cuts off the food. It's the rebels, precisely because they want to generate headlines like this. They have every interest. Starving civilians helps the rebels, doesn't help Assad. But now we can see humanitarian corridors. We had an interesting thing to point out. Who really launched the idea of humanitarian corridors and the responsibility to protect the humanitarian intervention? R2P, responsibility to protect. So the letter R, the number 2, and then the letter P. R2P. Who really, who put that on the map, so to speak, internationally? Well, it was Hitler. And you'll remember that he was talking about the much tormented, as in his view, German minority in Czechoslovakia, the so-called Sudeten Germans. So the Sudetenland was the trigger for the Munich crisis of September 1938. That has obviously put the world on track for the outbreak of World War II about a year later. And this is Samantha Power, this is Kerry, this is Rice, this is Nuland when she gets around to that. The humanitarian corridor is the Hitlerian invention, which has now become the stock in trade of the U.S. State Department. Go to Tarpley.net, put in Sudetenland, put in Henline, put in Czech, and so forth, and you'll find an article that I wrote a little bit more than a year ago about the intimate parallels between the Czech crisis of 1938 and the current Syrian situation. The Washington Post mentions this British resolution in the course of an editorial. Options on Syria, the president can do much more to stop the Assad regime's war crimes. And of course, they whine. They say the Obama White House has a stock response for critics, which is to say, if you don't like what we're doing, that means you want another Middle East war. That is actually true. The Obama White House is correct on that point. Most of these people who pretend to be concerned about humanitarianism want war, like the Washington Post. They're drooling. They can't wait for war. So the idea that humanitarian corridors could be done peacefully is crazy. You cannot force aid deliveries in there without encountering various military forces, Syrian army and or death squads. And remember, the death squads are now in at least 2 main camps, and then they're even further subdivided. This morning, if you woke up and thought that you had died in your sleep and gone to hell, maybe it was the voice of Samantha Power on National Public Radio, right, talking about this monstrous regime. This woman should be committed to an insane asylum at the earliest possible moment. Samantha Power is on her way to Nuremberg. Presumably she'll have Cass Sunstein, her hubby, with her. Maybe Newland will be in the same shipment. But we're now back to the same stuff. And I'm not going to go through all of the straws in the wind, all of the raving on this stuff. There is this moment where Kerry is alleged to have told some reactionary Republican senators, some warmongers, that he thought that the Obama policy on Syria was inadequate, and they put that out, and then the State Department denied it. I think it's quite likely that Kerry did say that. And here's what I would ask Obama. You know, Obama, when McChrystal dissed you and dissed, Vice President Biden as bite me, you fired him. Now, something rather more substantive, Kerry is telling his reactionary friends in the Senate that he wanted something different as a foreign policy, that the Obama foreign policy is feckless and weak and ineffective. Why don't you fire Kerry? Fire him, for God's sake. Get him out of there. And Rice, and now let's get to Victoria's Secret. So some enterprising hacker, I guess we can say, has come up with this tape. Right? Go to my Twitter feed, and you'll find the links to it, where Victoria Nuland shoots her skanky mouth off. She's Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, and she says, blank obscenity to EU. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Our second hour just wrapping up on Ukraine and Victoria's Secret. This is Madame Nuland. She's, of course, married to the top neocon, Donald Kagan, one of the nasty warmonger advisors to Mitt Romney. Guaranteed, if that guy had been if Donald Kagan had been where Susan Rice is now and Romney in the White House, you'd have at least two wars going, so don't forget that. Unfortunately, there's no guarantee that won't happen anyway, a little bit slower with the Obama, Kerry, Rice, and company, including Nuland. Now, Nuland, of course, says obscenity, the European Union. She is herself obscene. This is a conversation with a guy called Jeffrey Pyatt, P-Y-A-T-T, and this Jeffrey, that's Jeffrey with a G-E-O at the beginning, Anglophile family, I guess. They're talking about how to assemble the puppet regime they want in Kiev, and it is a remarkable, frank discussion of how they manipulate their puppets. It is clear from the discussion that they regard Klitschko, the punch-drunk palooka of Kiev, the heavyweight prize fighter, U.S. green card holder, and generally somebody who lives in Germany, they regard him as too dumb to be the prime minister at this time. They seem to want him more as a figurehead, especially if the constitution is changed so that the Ukrainian president becomes more of a figurehead. They'd like somebody like Klitschko to do that. The one that they want to give administrative control to is Yatsenyuk. Let's call him Yat the Rat, Y-A-T. Y-A-T-S-E-N-I-U-K, according to most transliterations. That's who they want to install. So they want Klitschko out of the government. They also want Chanibok out of the government with his fascist, overtly fascist neo-Nazi group. And they want Yatsenyuk then to become the actual wielder of power, while the others organize outside, and they're all in close conversation 4 times a week, whatever it is, as she says. They're obviously admitting that the Ukrainian opposition are foreign puppets. I have received some objections to my analysis on Ukraine. I got one rather documented, well-argued thing. I would simply ask people, now that you see this, what can you say? How could it not be clear that Yats and Klitsch and Chanibok are foreign puppets, and they're all part of the same operation, right? Don't say that, oh, they're just a minority, the fascists are just a small part. They set the tone, and above all, the other leaders don't denounce them, right? You can't allow fascists into your demonstration, because then you're going to be tarred with that. So you're known by the company you keep up to a certain point, right? When it gets to that kind of extremity. So it's clear that Nuland and Payat regard these people as their puppets. They want Yatsenyuk in. They think Klitschko he's obviously not capable. They are foreign puppets. They have an inter-imperialist rivalry going with the European Union and Madame Ashton, right? Cathy is Baroness Ashton, this pitiful figure, right? So I've heard a report that when she had her hearing, her confirmation hearing in the European Parliament, she had to do it twice because the first time her performance was so wretched that it was some people were unsure whether she could actually do the job, and then she had to come back better prepared. She's obviously a lightweight. She's obviously a fool. So that's Madame or Baroness Ashton. So what these U.S. people are saying is that the European Union is too weak and too slow. Part of this is they wanted Europe to give a better offer. The offer that came from the European Union is wretched. No membership in the EU, no aid, only sacrifices, only losses in that side, and on the other side, $15 billion coming from Putin. So the U.S. wants the European Union to pay to keep Ukraine in the NATO sphere. And there's also this question about economic sanctions, and the smaller European Union states, other than Britain, France, and Germany, I think, are all very, very reluctant to do anything in the way of economic sanctions against the Ukraine. We're also seeing Yanukovych as a weak entry, right? The Russians say that they're not going to pay any more tranches, about $15 billion, because Yanukovych is too weak at the moment. They want to see some signs of strength from Yanukovych before they pay any more money. So remember the old chicken Kiev. I'm afraid the chicken Kiev this time around is Yanukovych allowing these terrorists now in Ukraine to run wild. Here's a good analysis from the Voltaire Network. The Voltaire Network is reporting that the CIA has brought 3,000 Middle East terrorists. This would be veterans of Libya and or Syria primarily, and has assembled them in Romania, close to Ukraine, and that these are either deployed or about to be deployed, and that when the government buildings in the western Ukraine, Lvov, Lemberg, Lviv in particular, were taken over, that seems to have been partly the result of this mobilization with these characters with Middle East combat experience. Now, concerning Victoria's Secret, once again, Barroso, the Portuguese fascist who runs the European Commission, he's whining, you can't talk about us that way. We're not weak. It's not true, right? We're full-fledged imperialists. It's sort of an unfortunate situation. And with the State Department, in terms of sour grapes, double standards, hypocrisy, and so forth, the State Department is whining that Russia tapped the telephones and then published it. This is now after Snowden, the one thing that everybody has been reminded of, not told, but reminded of, is that the U.S. spies on all these countries, of course, which we already knew. Didn't need Snowden for that. But imagine the U.S. now saying, how dare you tap our phones after all of this stuff, right? The U.S. is whining about that. And instead, from here, we say, thank you, Russia. If Russia did it, thank you. We're so happy to see the truth about how these degenerates from the State Department, this canaille of the State Department, right? This plebeian mob, right? That how they operate. So it's going to be inevitable that some form of solution be found in Ukraine. Probably we have to think now. The Olympics, the opening ceremony of the Olympics is going on as we speak. So this is Sochi, and I think the obvious conclusion is for the next 2.5, 3 weeks, it's very unlikely that any big crackdown would be launched in Ukraine or other initiatives, right? The Russian government probably focused on getting the Olympics successfully completed and everybody home and fighting off terrorism and so forth, so they're not going to stir the pot for the next 2 or 3 weeks. After that, that's when these Ukrainian hooligans might find that their act has grown old. So let us now switch to the principal elements of novelty and indeed of hope in the current situation, which is the European Parliament election. This is the series of days of voting starting on May 22nd, May 25th, and some others, and the Tsipras candidacy to become the head of the European Commission. This is now a key mass strike element. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the Israel. Now let's look at people on the positive side, the hopeful side. This is where people need to become engaged, right? You suppose you're sitting in the United States or Canada, Australia, whatever it is. You've got to find a way to take part in this European Parliament mobilization. Tsipras in Rome today called for a co-mobilization for self-organization. Get busy. And that's European-wide for sure, but I think there's a lot of work that can be done in terms of telling that story in the English-speaking culture ghetto here as well. So we're talking Alexis Tsipras. We're talking about the Syriza party. Remember, they were narrowly defeated by a couple of percentage points in the spring of 2012 for the Greek national parliamentary election. They came in just short, and the New Democracy of Samaras, the right-wing reactionary pro-IMF party, came in first, and they got this bonus, right? They got the bonus that some countries, Italy also has. So that's the current government of Greece, is Samaras. Now, two things are happening, or at least two. The first is the polls, as of about the end of November, beginning of December, the public opinion polls have flipped in Greece, and the New Democracy of Samaras, right-wing reactionary IMF, is no longer leading for the next election. Now, the next election can be any time. Any time the New Democracy seems to have lost its majority, under that system, you call a vote of confidence, they lose it. That's very likely to be followed by elections. The IMF will try to avoid elections and so forth, but still elections are likely then to occur. If there are elections, as of right now, Alexis Tsipras would become the Prime Minister of Greece and attend all of those meetings in Brussels with Merkel, with Cameron, with Hollande, with the rest of these people. So this is a very, very hopeful sign. This is a left-wing populist party with very good positions, on the whole, excellent. And they are about to become the government of this tragically tormented victim of austerity, which is Greece. Now let's get into some of the content. Tsipras is on a European tour. He's in Rome right now, today. The rally in Rome has just ended. I watched most of it before the taping of this program began. So we have a couple of wire service articles that now sum up what is the Tsipras line, and I can go through some of this and then in more detail. The first thing he wants to point out is that the reactionary party in Greece is likely to be destroyed in the next election. Hey, people, I've been telling you, the Republican Party could be destroyed. The Berlusconi Party in Italy has split into two parts. The Republicans could also. But what Tsipras is saying, he's sort of in our universe of discourse, I would say. He says the new democracy will be wiped out. And the point was that in 2012, because of its complicity, collusion with austerity, the so-called Socialist Party, PASOK, was essentially wiped out. It went from 25-30% down to about 12%. And this, the fat guy, Venizelos, the former finance minister, he's now the head of that, but they're nowhere. The recent poll, I think, that said it most clearly was that you had Syriza at 32.2, and you had New Democracy at 27.2. It's a 5 percentage point difference. So that's already a majority. And under the Greek system, they would then get a majority bonus. They would then be able to do all sorts of interesting things. And here's what Tsipras points to. Given the situation of Greece, this would not be the situation of the United States or some other countries, but certainly with Greece, this is absolutely correct. He's pointing to the question of international financial debt, because Greece, of course, has now been bailed out 3 times. Greece has come under the rule of the Troika, the International Monetary Fund, the European Commission, and the European Central Bank. So Madame Lagarde of the IMF, Barroso of the European Commission, and Draghi of the European Central Bank. So he wants to fight that. And this is absolutely a way to do it. What he's proposing essentially is a European-wide mobilization against the European Central Bank. And here's how. He wants to have an international debt conference. His model for the International Debt Conference is the London Conference of 1953. What that London Conference was, after World War I, Versailles reparations, this was then overtaken by default, 1932-33, everybody defaulted, except Finland, but the reparations and war debts and so forth, these were all left hanging. And then at the end of the Second World War, and then when the BRD, West Germany, was being created, an international debt conference was held in London. It took about 6 months, from the spring to the summer of that year. And the decision was to take all the outstanding debts of Germany, West Germany now, because they claim to be the only German representative state, and they cut it by 1/2. So have an international debt conference and arrive at a negotiated haircut down, call it what you will, with a 50% reduction in the debt burden. Now, concerning specifically Greece, Tsipras says that he would like to see the Greek public debt go from about 175% of GDP to about 110% of GDP. So it looks like he's talking about cutting about 1/3 off the Greek debt. Other calculations might say it's necessary to cut more, maybe 60% or so would be necessary. And notice, though, he's not simply calling for this in regard to Greece, but the other countries that have been bailed out. Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Italy could certainly get in there. France would benefit. All kinds of Europeans, Eastern Europeans. So here's an international initiative for an international debt conference to begin writing down debt. And for these countries, right, these smaller countries, this is, I think, absolutely essential. And the question, of course, is they ask him, if you don't get what you want, will you do that unilaterally? And he says, I would like to come to a negotiated solution that would be mutually acceptable. But if our partners get violent, we will not hesitate. There will be, in effect, a debt moratorium. And this is exactly what I've been calling for since I went to Iceland there in the fall of 2009 in particular. Unilateral debt moratorium if we don't get reasonable negotiation. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So Tsipras calling for an international debt conference modeled on London 1953, begin cutting the debt of Greece by something approximately a half or maybe two-thirds or something approaching that. That's his bargaining position. He's not going to be too specific. The unilateral approach to the debt is only going to be called into play if the partners get violent. It means Madame Merkel and her policy of threats. Now, he's got an op-ed, Tsipras op-ed in Le Monde. Time to dust off your foreign languages, gang, and start following these things. The Le Monde article is, he calls Merkel the sleepwalker of Europe when it comes to debt. La Sonnambula, right? The famous opera by Bellini. La Somnambule of Europe is Madame Merkel. And she, remember, back in 2012, Merkel had said, if Syriza wins the election, Germany will press to expel Greece from the European Union. Well, sorry, Merkel, you can't do that. Europe is a historical concept. You can't carve Greece out of Europe. That's where Europe began. So you're crazy. And what he does is essentially he says to Merkel, the policy of making these threats, right? The Republicans should maybe think about some of this stuff. The policy of threats is always a bad idea because it begins to become self-fulfilling. You make radical threats, you're actually likely to bring these things on. And generally speaking, what Tsipras is saying is that the Merkel policy is faulty. Merkel herself ought to see that if Germany has made these bailout loans now and made austerity, killer austerity, genocidal austerity the precondition, you're going to lose your money because the austerity just doesn't work. You're destroying the economy, destroying the basis of paying it back. You, Merkel, in your own interest, should realize that you've got to put a stop to the austerity plans because you're going to lose your money that way. And this question of austerity is absolutely central for Tsipras. A lot of the people that he's talking to in Europe have not figured that out, but we have. We're the United Front Against Austerity, as founded in New York City in October of 2012, citing Tsipras and Syriza, and with a guy, one of our speakers was the guy who is likely to become the finance minister of Greece if this goes through. So again, international debt conference, radically cut the debt of Greece and other countries. Don't use the debt moratorium unless you have to, unless the partners get violent. And then, he says, at that point, we want a new deal of investments to revive growth, a new deal for Greece instead of this barbarous austerity. Now, in the Rome presentation that he just made, he's speaking in Greek, and he says New Deal in Greek, and the Italian translation says New Deal. In other words, the New Deal appears in English every time. He's talking in Greek, and then you hear New Deal. And then the Italian translation, which I can understand much better, then he says, they say New Deal. So it means the Greeks and the Italians know what New Deal means. Hey, do the Americans know what the New Deal means? I hope they haven't forgotten, because this is the contribution of the U.S. So the New Deal would mean an investment program, and he doesn't go into this, but it's obviously got to include great projects, which some of the Malthusians and Greenies won't like. But as Tsipras says, let's focus on what unites us and not on what divides us. So that's pretty much the general content. Now, what is he doing? He wants to become the head of the European Commission. This is a stroke of genius. We currently have this Barroso. We've had all kinds of characters, but Barroso, the Portuguese fascist, has been the exterminating angel of austerity. So Tsipras is now a candidate for that job. And here's where he's going. He's already been to the Netherlands. He's already been to Paris. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but the Paris one is on the internet. You can find it. Just do Tsipras, Paris, I think it's February 3rd. He's in Rome right now. He will be in Germany in mid-February. He will go on to Prague. He will go on to Slovenia, to Ireland, to Sweden, to Portugal, and to Spain. I noticed that the British are not there. British, aren't you ashamed of yourself? You better get yourself organized and invite Tsipras to Great Britain. I don't know what's wrong with you people, but that would be a terrible, fatal political mistake, right? The whole left wing in Britain can't pull themselves together to get Tsipras in there. We're going to have to ask ourselves some pretty radical questions. So notice that the threat from Merkel is something that he's glad to bring up, right? If Merkel has said, I'm going to force you out of the euro if Syriza wins, for many people, correct, right-thinking people, this is the beginning of a great interest in this. Now, here's also what is announced at the Paris meeting. Now, you find this on the tape. There's going to be an anti-austerity march in a number of European countries on the 12th to the 13th of April. Mark that in your calendar. 12th to 13th of April, Pan-European Anti-Austerity March. Now this, here in the U.S., can't we manage something? Can't we pull something off in cooperation with Syriza and this front across Europe? The 12th to the 13th of April, Anti-Austerity March. They're talking about a summit in Brussels on the 10th of April about debt, a debt summit. And of course, the debt can be fought in a number of ways. One of the ways is a debt conference. Another way is a debt moratorium, unilateral. Another way is simply economic growth, so you grow your way out of it, and the debt diminishes in proportion to your economy. Another way is to start with 0% credit and lower the interest rates so that the interest burden becomes essentially approaching zero. So what he wants is it's a 60% of GDP write down, and in particular, he thinks that other Southern European countries would be interested in having this. Now, let's talk about the speech now in Rome, the one that has just ended. I urge you to look at the Paris one. I urge you to follow every step of this. Think of what language you know. Try to follow it. And he speaks Greek, and they translate it into the language. So think where you can follow it. What he wants is to break the back of dogmatic neoliberalism for all the countries of the world and stop the violent attack on labor. Now, I'm pretty much paraphrasing here. He is calling for a fight against neoliberal austerity. Neoliberal austerity, austerity, austerity. And again, a lot of these people, the European left of Germany, France, they don't make that the main thing. Italy, certainly not. But that is the main point. You can see that he's working very hard to get these other people to see it. So he wants to use the United Front method, right? Focus on what unites you, not what divides you. No to austerity. And he says, you Italian leftists, from Greece we often followed you, but now you've got to learn from us. The Greek left is way ahead of the Italian one. So learn something. Learn to fight austerity. Back in a minute. Let's head now and try to get the complete summary of this speech by Alexis Tsipras in Rome just concluded. So it's a united front against austerity, using the United Front method with the anti-austerity message, break the back of neoliberal economic doctrine. He says the Italian left absolutely key, that in Greece, traditionally, right, because of the large Italian Communist Party and so forth, everybody was following the Italian situation. Now it's time for you Italians to learn from Syriza. And he says, we started as an innovative leftist zone. In other words, we're not just following the Soviet line or Cuban line or whatever it was, but you've now got to pay attention to Syriza. And he urges them, you've got to think and plan European-wide with a European focus. In other words, it's a nice way of saying, get rid of your narrow nationalism, your narrow chauvinism, because unfortunately, most of the time, these groups, grouplets, and so forth, they don't think European-wide. This was one of the tremendous advantages of the European Labour Party, founded by yours truly back in the early 1970s. His goal, to free Europe from the long night of neoliberal free trade economics. There's a cause, to free Europe, 500, 650 million people, from the long night of neoliberal free trade economics. Right? You may have heard me talk about ending the long reactionary nightmare, 1968 to 2008. It's close enough. He thinks that austerity is destroying, wiping out Southern Europe. Some specific examples. He says the Fiat automobile company has moved its administrative headquarters to the Netherlands and its tax location to Great Britain. The Swedish Electrolux, right, vacuum cleaners and appliances, they are moving everything to Poland. So he praises the work of the Italian metal workers, FIOM, the more radical of the three metal workers federations. But in any case, Syriza is about to take over the Greek government, and Syriza has a success story. Learn from that, and you can have your own success story. Now, the question of right-wing populism, you can think of this as the Golden Dawn, right? The Chrissy Avni, which is now, I think, changing its name because they've been banned in one form. He says right-wing populism and neo-Nazism are the worst enemy that you can have. He calls on the assembled people to stop extreme right-wing populism. He says these people, similar to our libertarians, I must say, they come forward claiming to be against the system. But Sipra says those right-wing populists are not against the system. They are the reserve army of the neoliberal system. They pretend to be against the system, and in reality, they represent a more savage version of the mainline financier program. I simply add, right? You look at, union busting, austerity, and all the rest of it. The libertarians are even worse than some Republicans. So you get the idea. Now, Greece has been destroyed under he calls it the memorandum. The memorandum is what we would call the International Monetary Fund letter of intent. Right? The IMF letter of intent is where you accept their conditionalities. Right? You capitulate and you say, I will destroy my unemployment benefits, I will cut welfare payments, I will privatize this, I will deregulate that. So he says, what are we going to have? The Europe of the memorandum or the Europe of the people? The Europe of the IMF or the Europe of the historical nations? However, he says, Europe is the battlefield. Europe is the primary focus of the struggle. Whether you like it or not, you Italians, you French, this is it. In other words, the narrow nationalism, right? The tunnel vision. He says, we are attempting to get class struggle going, and the leftists must operate European-wide. Anybody with a class analysis, anybody interested in class struggle. What does class struggle mean today? It means the 99% against the 1%, the people against the finance oligarchs, in my terminology. Our fate is clearly interdependent. As never since the end of World War II, we need cooperation and solidarity, and we need to have a common design for what tomorrow should look like. It's tremendously powerful stuff. Going on, Tsipras says, the European neoliberal establishment has so far run this crisis to roll back the post-war European economy in the sense of destroying the rights of labor, right? As I've argued before, in the 50s and the 60s, the cooperation of social democrats, Christian democrats, Catholic social doctrine led to a significant degree of empowerment of labor, working people, and so forth. But now under the neoliberal, when the European establishment became neoliberal, even the social democrats, right, the whole damn thing, Christian democrats, social democrats, all neoliberal, that led then to the wipeout of the rights of labor. And he says their goal right now is a low-wage Europe, which we have got to oppose. And the European institutions are being suffocated by the straitjacket of austerity. It always comes back to austerity. So the various component populations hate the neoliberal Europe. Rather, it's the task of an enlightened left-wing opposition to defend Europe. This is the Europe that's got to be improved, and it's not the Europe of the conservatives, the neoliberals, or the social democrats. We could also say of the banks and cartels. But so no to the Europe of the memoranda of the IMF letters of credit, and no to the barbarism of austerity and the economic oligarchy. Rather, it should be the Europe of the peoples based on human need. He wants a common European budget. He says, and then Italy needs a debt write-down. How can you Italians pay 2 trillion euros of debt? The Europe that we want is democratic, not authoritarian. Right, the way it works right now is that 27 prime ministers troop in Brussels. Merkel arrives and tells them what they have to do. This is not the German people talking, but it's Merkel. Rather, what is needed is a humanitarian Europe that will not allow immigrants to drown in the Mediterranean, right? We just had the tragic story last summer of Lampedusa, right, an Italian island in the middle of the Mediterranean, where people coming from North Africa have drowned in large numbers, right? And not just once, but more than once. So, don't destroy resources for the profits of multinationals. The experience of unity, in other words, the way that Syriza was assembled, right? About a dozen different components had to be welded together to make this a winning party. He wants support committees everywhere. Every association, every group is invited to take part. Just bracket your differences. Be inclusive, not exclusive. The Greeks have suffered like no other country in the world under this IMF austerity. In the past, the Italian left was considered to be a pharos, right, a lighthouse of enlightenment, but now this has passed to Greece. So what he's talking about is Il Sorpasso, the famous movie, right, one of the Italian movies from the 60s. The passing and overtaking. What he's saying is that Syriza is going to pass and overtake the right-wing party. So there's a tour de force. I'll write up some of this stuff, but you get the idea. So mobilize people. Do something to help Syriza, Tsipras, and this pan-European list. Now, there are some shadows in the picture in terms of who he's getting to work with him. We'll go through that in due time next week, right? Guido Viale, Tony Negri, not so good. Fausto Bertinotti, not so good, but we'll get to them in due time. See you next week.